The prison station sat at the far edge of Dravani space, bolted to a dead asteroid in a system where nothing lived and nothing grew. It was the kind of place the galaxy tried to forget existed. Vorath, Korath, and Selby arrived on a transport shuttle and were led through 7 security checkpoints before they reached the interview room. Graxus was already waiting for them behind a wall of energy bars. He was a Nilori, tall, gray-skinned, with 4 eyes and a mouth full of teeth that had been filed to points. He had once commanded a fleet of 40 raider ships. He had burned colonies, stolen cargo worth billions, and killed more people than most wars. Now he sat in a metal chair in a concrete room and looked at his visitors with dull, bored eyes. "You want to know about the humans," Graxus said before any of them spoke. He smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. Everyone eventually asks about the humans. Vorath placed his recorder on the table. 12 years ago, you planned a raid on a human mining colony in the Vega Corridor. You had the ships, the crew, and the intelligence. But you called it off. Why? Graxus leaned back. He was quiet for a long moment, and something changed in his 4 eyes. The boredom left, and what replaced it was something Vorath had not expected to see on the face of one of the galaxy's most feared criminals. It was caution. "I had a lieutenant," Graxus said slowly, "a mercenary named Bolsk. Tough creature, fought in 20 campaigns, scared of nothing. Bolsk had worked with humans once, years earlier, as part of a mixed mercenary company during the Tauran border war. He never talked about it, never told stories, and mercenaries always tell stories, you understand? It is all they do. But Bolsk never said one word about his time with the humans." Graxus shifted in his chair. "When I told him we were hitting the Vega colony, he came to my quarters. Private. Just us. And he told me what he saw. The story Bolsk had told was simple. During the Tauran border war, a small human outpost had been caught in the crossfire between 2 alien armies. The outpost was not military. It was a mining settlement. About 300 humans, mostly workers, engineers, and their families. They had no warships, no heavy weapons, no soldiers. When the fighting reached them, everyone expected the humans to surrender or run. That was what any sensible people would do. The attacking army sent them a simple message: leave the outpost within 6 hours or die. The humans did not leave. They spent those 6 hours turning their mining outpost into a fortress. They took apart their drilling machines and built weapons from the parts. They turned their habitat domes into choke points with blocked corridors and hidden firing positions. They dug trenches using excavation equipment. The school teachers organized the children into groups and moved them to the deepest underground shelters. The miners and engineers took up positions along the perimeter. When the 6 hours ended and the army attacked, they expected to walk through the settlement in minutes. Instead, they walked into a nightmare. The humans fought from every corner, every shadow, every doorway. They used the tunnels they had dug for mining to appear behind enemy lines and disappear again. They improvised explosives from chemical supplies. They fought with tools, with pipes, with their bare hands when they ran out of everything else. The battle lasted 11 days. 11 days against a professional military force with armor, air support, and 10 times their numbers. The humans lost people every day. They buried their dead at night and were back fighting by morning. They did not ask for terms. They did not send messages of surrender. They simply kept fighting. When human military ships finally arrived from the nearest colony, they found the outpost still standing. The attacking army had pulled back after losing nearly a third of its forces to a group of miners and school teachers. The humans were already cleaning up, already rebuilding. The children were back in a temporary school set up in a storage room. A woman with a bandaged arm was teaching math. Graxus said that when Bolsk finished telling him this story, the old mercenary looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Those were not soldiers, Graxus. Those were ordinary people. Farmers, teachers, mechanics. If ordinary humans can do that, what do you think their actual military will do to us? Graxus cancelled the raid the next morning. I am many things, Graxus told Vorath. A thief, a killer. You do not poke that kind of animal. They left the prison station and traveled for 2 days to reach their next contact, a diplomatic envoy from the HFY Collective. The HFY were telepaths. They could read minds, push thoughts, and influence emotions. They were not fighters. They were manipulators, and they were extremely good at it. Half the trade deals in the galaxy had a HFY whispering in someone's ear somewhere. The envoy met them in a private room on a trade station. The HFY was small, pale, with large black eyes and no visible mouth. They communicated through thought projection. The envoy had agreed to speak only on the condition that its name would never be recorded. 10 years ago, the HFY Collective had attempted something they called a quiet influence operation against humanity. They had sent telepathic operatives to human political centers, embassies, trade hubs, government offices, with orders to gently nudge human leaders toward decisions that favored the Sari interests. It was the kind of thing they did to every species. It usually worked within a few weeks. With humans, it lasted less than 3 weeks before the entire operation was shut down. The envoy projected its thoughts directly into the minds of all 3 investigators. Its mental voice was calm, but carried a weight of memory that made Selby close her eyes. Human minds are not like other minds, the envoy communicated. Most species have organized thoughts, layers that make sense. You can move through them like rooms in a building. Humans are different. A human mind is like a storm that has learned to think. There are layers of emotions stacked on top of each other. Love and fear and rage and joy and grief and hope, all tangled together, all running at the same time. And beneath all of it, at the very bottom, there is something old, something that comes from their evolution on a dangerous world. A survival instinct so deep and so powerful that it nearly burned one of our operatives alive when she touched it. The envoy paused. We sent 12 operatives to work on human targets. 9 of them requested immediate withdrawal within the first week. 2 of them suffered mental trauma that took months to heal. The last one, our most experienced, our strongest, she made contact with the mind of a human leader, a calm, polite man who ran a trade office. She expected a simple, organized mind. What she found was a creature carrying thousands of years of war, loss, survival, and fury, all held in check by nothing more than willpower and love for the people around him. She broke contact after 4 seconds and did not speak for a month. The envoy leaned forward slightly. Most species have either conquered their inner darkness or been consumed by it. Humans have done neither. They carry it with them, always, like a weapon they never put down, and they have learned to use it. The Thesari abandoned the operation and added humans to a very short list of species that were classified as mentally hazardous. Their final interview was with a retired Koreshi admiral named Zethru, now living quietly on a garden world at the heart of Koreshi space. Zethru was old. His shell was cracked in places, and his 4 arms moved slowly. But his mind was still sharp. He invited them into his home, served them tea, and listened to their questions with the patience of someone who had been expecting this conversation for a very long time. 30 years ago, Admiral Zethru had drawn up a full invasion plan for Earth's solar system. On paper it was sound. The Koreshi fleet was larger, their weapons slightly better, and Earth had clear defensive gaps. The war games predicted a Koreshi victory within 6 months. Zethru shelved the plan after reading a single intelligence briefing on human history. I learned what they did to themselves, Zethru said quietly. Their world wars, their weapons that split atoms, their ability to go from riding animals to walking on their own moon in the span of a single lifetime. And do you know what drove every one of those advances? Not curiosity, not greed, conflict. Humans get better when they fight. They get faster. They get smarter. Every war makes them more dangerous than the one before. He looked at Vorath with old, tired eyes. If we had invaded Earth, we might have won. The numbers said we would. But within one generation, they would have taken our technology, improved it, and come for us. Not to negotiate, not to make peace, to make sure we could never be a threat to them again. That is what they do. They learn from their enemies, and then they end them. They left Zethru's home in silence. On the shuttle back to Concord Station, Korath stood by the window for a long time, staring at the stars. Finally, he spoke. Every person we talked to, the pirate, the telepath, the admiral, they all used a different word, but they all meant the same thing. What thing? Vorath asked. Korath turned from the window. For the first time since Vorath had known him, the big Dravani warrior looked unsettled. Do not touch the humans. The shuttle dropped out of faster-than-light travel above a world that looked from orbit like a painting. Green landmasses, blue oceans, white clouds drifting in lazy bands across the surface. Haven, the humans called it. A colony world near the edge of human-controlled space, home to roughly 80,000 people. Vorath had expected something military, a world ringed with defense stations, warships in orbit, armored platforms bristling with weapons. Instead, he saw 2 small patrol ships, a handful of communication satellites, and a civilian spaceport that looked like it had been built by someone who cared more about gardens than security. This cannot be right, Korath muttered, staring at the scanner readout. 80,000 people and barely any defense grid. A decent raider fleet could take this world in a day. She was watching the surface through the viewport with her large, dark eyes, and there was a small, knowing smile on her face that Vorath found both reassuring and slightly irritating. They landed at the main spaceport near the colony's largest town, a place called Millbrook. Their guide was waiting for them at the landing pad. He was a human male in his late 40s, medium height, a little soft around the middle, with thinning brown hair, and a smile so wide it seemed to take up half his face. He wore a casual jacket and carried a paper cup of something hot that smelled bitter and dark. Danny Callahan, he said, sticking out his free hand. Colonial Administration, welcome to Haven. You folks want coffee? It is terrible, but it is warm. Vorath did not know what coffee was, and politely declined. Korath stared at Danny's outstretched hand with suspicion, until Selby quietly explained that humans shook hands as a greeting. Korath shook it carefully, clearly afraid of breaking the man's fingers. Danny led them into town in a small ground vehicle, talking the entire time. He pointed out everything, the school, the hospital, the farms that stretched out along the river valley, the brewery that made something called lager, the half-finished community theater that the town had been arguing about for 2 years. We cannot agree on whether to do the seats in red or blue, Danny said with a laugh. Been going back and forth at town meetings for months. Old lady Barbara Nolan almost threw a chair at the mayor last week over it. It was the most exciting thing that has happened here since the Harvest Festival. Millbrook looked like a town that had grown up naturally, without much planning. The streets were a little crooked. Some buildings were old and patched. Others were new and shiny. Children ran between houses, chasing each other with sticks. A group of old men sat on a bench outside a shop, arguing loudly about something while a dog slept at their feet. A woman sold fruit from a cart and waved at Danny as they passed. It was warm. It was messy. It was alive. Korath grew more agitated with every block. His eyes swept rooftops, alleys, and intersections the way a soldier's eyes always did. He was looking for defenses and finding none. Finally, he could not hold it any longer. "Where are your weapons?" he asked bluntly. Danny glanced at him in the rearview mirror. What do you mean? I mean weapons, defense systems, shield generators, bunkers, anything. You have 80,000 people on this world and I have seen nothing that would stop even a small raiding party. How do you protect these people? Danny's smile did not disappear, but it changed. It stayed on his mouth, but something behind his eyes shifted. Something quick and hard, like a door opening to a dark room and then closing again. You want to see? Danny asked. He drove them to the edge of town, to a large, flat building with a sign out front that read, Millbrook Community Center. Inside, it looked exactly like what the sign promised. There was a basketball court where teenagers were playing a loud, rough game. A library with rows of books and a few people reading quietly. A daycare room where small children were stacking colored blocks while a young woman watched them. It smelled like floor polish and old sneakers. Danny led them past all of this, to a door at the back. He pressed his thumb to a scanner, and the door opened to reveal a staircase going down. The staircase went deep, 3 levels underground, and what Vorath saw at the bottom made him stop walking. It was a command post. A full emergency operations center, built into solid rock beneath the community center. There were map screens showing the entire colony and the surrounding space. Communication stations that could reach human military command on the other side of their territory. Weapons lockers filled with rifles, armor, and ammunition. Medical bays with surgical equipment and blood supplies. Storage rooms packed with food, water, and survival gear. Enough, Danny explained casually, to keep the entire town alive for 6 months. Every public building in Millbrook has one of these, Danny said. He leaned against a wall and sipped his coffee. The school, the hospital, the town hall, even Barbara Nolan's church. Every colonist over 16 has done basic emergency defense training. The kids do evacuation drills once a month. We have designated rally points, communication protocols, and a chain of command that activates automatically if we lose contact with the main government. He looked at Korath and shrugged. We hope we never have to use any of it, but hoping is not the same as planning. Korath stood in the middle of the command post and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. His expression was something Vorath had never seen on a Dravani warrior before. It was respect. You hide your claws, Korath said quietly. We do not hide them, Danny replied. We just do not wave them around. They went back to the surface. Selby walked beside Danny as they crossed a park where families were having picnics in the afternoon sun. She had been quiet for most of the tour, watching everything with those big, thoughtful eyes. Now she asked him a question that cut straight to the heart of what all 3 of them wanted to understand. Why are humans like this? She asked softly. You clearly want peace. You build schools and theaters and parks. You grow food and raise children. But underneath it all, you prepare for war. Always. Why? Danny was quiet for a long time. They walked past a playground where children were screaming and laughing on a set of swings. He watched them for a moment, and something gentle and something fierce passed across his face at the same time. My grandfather, Danny said finally, Pete Callahan. He grew up in a tough part of a city called Baltimore. Rough neighborhood. A lot of bad stuff happened around him when he was young. But he became a school teacher. Coached kids baseball. Volunteered at a food bank every weekend. Sweetest man you ever met. Always smiling. Always helping. Danny paused. But he kept a bat by his front door. And he taught every single one of his grandchildren how to throw a punch. When I asked him why, he sat me down and said, Danny, the world is full of good people. But it only takes one bad one to ruin everything. So you be good. You be kind. You help everyone you can. But you also make sure that if someone comes through that door meaning harm, they regret it for the rest of their very short lives. Danny looked at Selby. That is basically humanity's foreign policy. That evening, the trio attended a community gathering, a potluck dinner in the town square. Long tables were set up under strings of warm light, and humans brought food from their homes. Vorath had never seen so much food in so many different shapes and colors. Danny explained that the dishes came from dozens of different human cultures, traditions from Earth that people had carried with them across the stars. He watched a woman named Maggie Owens, a retired pilot with scars on her hands and a baby on her hip, laugh with one group of friends, and then walk over to another table to help a young engineer fix a broken chair. He watched her hold her baby gently against her chest while she talked about engine thrust ratios with technical precision that would have impressed a Koreshi engineer. Korath stood near the edge of the gathering, arms crossed, watching a group of teenagers wrestle in a field beside the square. They were rough. They threw each other to the ground, pinned arms, kicked legs free. They were laughing, but Korath could see the skill in it. These were not children playing. These were young fighters learning their craft and calling it fun. Selby sat among a group of older humans and listened to their stories. A man named Hank told a long, funny story about the time he got lost in the woods for 3 days as a young man and survived by eating berries and talking to a bird he named Carl. Everyone laughed. A woman named Patty talked about her daughter who had just joined the Colonial Medical Corps. Her voice was full of pride and a thin edge of worry that she tried to hide. Selby noticed something that stayed with her long after the dinner ended. Whenever someone at the gathering needed help, a dropped plate, a crying child, an old woman struggling to carry a heavy dish, someone was there within seconds. Not one specific person, anyone nearby. They moved to help without thinking, without being asked, without waiting. It was automatic, like breathing. They stayed on Haven for 2 more days. They visited farms and factories. They sat in on a school class where children learned history and basic survival skills in the same afternoon. They watched a group of volunteer firefighters run a training exercise with a calm, practiced efficiency that matched any military unit Korath had ever seen. On the shuttle ride home, Korath was silent for a long time. He sat with his massive arms resting on his knees and stared at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. "They are not soldiers pretending to be civilians," he said. "They are civilians who can become soldiers in a heartbeat. Every single one of them. The pilot, the teacher, the old man with the funny stories, all of them." Vorath nodded slowly. "And they protect each other, not because someone orders them to, not because of duty or law. It is something deeper." Selby looked out the viewport at the stars. Her voice was quiet, but certain. "It is love," she said. "They love each other, not perfectly, not without arguments or mistakes, but deeply, fiercely. And that is why nobody attacks them. Because if you harm one human, you are not facing a military response. You are facing a family. And a family that fights together does not stop. Not for money, not for threats, not for anything." Korath looked at her. "You are saying that love is a weapon." Selby shook her head. "I am saying that for humans, love is the reason they fight. And a species that fights for love instead of territory or profit, that is a species you cannot beat. Because there is no price you can offer that will make them stop caring about each other." The shuttle flew on through the dark between the stars, and all 3 of them sat in silence, carrying with them the memory of a small town on a quiet world, where people ate together under warm lights and kept weapons beneath their children's schools. And none of them could decide which part of that picture frightened them more. Vorath was 3 days away from finishing the report when everything changed. He was in his office on Concord Station, organizing interview transcripts and arranging data into neat sections, when the emergency channel lit up across every screen on the station. A priority alert, the kind that only went out when something very bad had happened. A human medical frigate called the Shepherd had been attacked in neutral space. The details came in fast. The Shepherd was a small ship, lightly armed, carrying medical supplies to a Yulin refugee camp in the outer systems. It had a crew of 23, doctors, nurses, support staff, and a handful of flight crew. It was not a warship. It was not carrying anything valuable by military standards. It was carrying medicine for sick refugees. The attackers were the Vorn Syndicate. Vorath knew the name. Everyone in Galactic Intelligence knew the name. The Vorn Syndicate was a coalition of mercenaries, arms dealers, and criminals who had terrorized the Outer Rim for over a decade. They had raided dozens of colonies, destroyed trading posts, and killed thousands of people across multiple species. They were led by a Koreshi warlord named Dukan, a creature known for his cruelty and his complete lack of fear. Dukan had deployed 3 warships. They had disabled the Shepherd, boarded it, taken the crew hostage, and stripped the medical supplies. Then Dukan had broadcast a ransom demand to the entire galaxy on an open channel. He wanted 200 million galactic credits. If the humans did not pay within 48 hours, the crew would die. The broadcast showed the hostages on their knees in the Shepherd's cargo bay. Their hands were bound. Some of them were bleeding. A young man with short blonde hair and a medical uniform had a cut above his eye. A woman, in her 30s, held herself straight and stared at the camera with an expression that was not fear. It was anger. Vorath watched the broadcast from his office. Korath watched it from the combat training hall. Selby watched it from her quarters with her hands pressed over her mouth. The galaxy settled in to watch what would happen next. Most species expected the standard response: quiet negotiations behind closed doors, a diplomatic backchannel, maybe a reduced ransom, and eventually a quiet exchange. It was how these things were always handled. Nobody liked paying ransoms, but everybody did it. It was the practical thing to do. The human response came 6 hours later. It was not quiet. It was not behind closed doors. It was a single public statement broadcast on every open channel in the sector. Vorath read it on his screen, and his blood went cold. To the Vorn Syndicate, you have taken 23 of our people. You will return them unharmed within 12 hours. There will be no payment. There will be no negotiation. If our people are not returned safely, we will come for them, and then we will come for you. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. No diplomatic language, no softening words, no room for discussion, just a flat, calm promise wrapped in steel. Dukan laughed. He actually laughed. He broadcast a mocking reply, calling the humans arrogant and foolish. He said they were welcome to try and that he had 3 warships and a fortified base hidden in an asteroid field. He said the nearest human fleet was at least 2 days away. Then he proved he was serious. He pulled one of the hostages to his feet, the young man with the blonde hair. His name was Cody Grant. He was 26 years old. He had joined the Shepherd's medical team as a volunteer nurse 3 months ago. Dukan shot Cody Grant in the chest on a live broadcast, while the rest of the hostages watched. The galaxy gasped. The broadcast cut out, and for 8 hours, nothing happened. Vorath barely slept. He sat at his desk and monitored every communication channel he could access. Korath paced the halls of Concord Station like a caged animal, furious at the execution and frustrated that there was nothing he could do. Selby retreated to her quarters and did not come out. 8 hours after the execution of Cody Grant, a human rapid response carrier called the Longbow dropped out of faster-than-light travel less than 50 kilometers from the Vorn Syndicate's asteroid base. Vorath stared at his screen. That was impossible. The nearest known human fleet position was 2 days away. For the Longbow to arrive in 8 hours, it would have had to be already positioned nearby, in a region of space where it had no official reason to be. The Longbow was not a battleship. It was a carrier, a long, angular ship designed to launch small, fast, heavily armed strike craft. It carried 200 Marines and 40 fighters. It was not the biggest ship in the human fleet, but what it carried was enough. The Vorn Syndicate's 3 warships detected the longbow and moved to engage. What happened next was broadcast across half the galaxy, because Dukon had left his transmission channels open, and the humans did not bother to shut them down. The battle lasted 19 minutes. The human fighters launched in 4 waves. They did not fly in neat formations. They flew in fast weaving patterns that made them nearly impossible to target. They hit the first Vorn warship from 3 angles at once, punching through its shields and tearing apart its engines in a volley of precise strikes. The ship broke apart in less than 3 minutes. The second warship tried to run. The human fighters caught it before it reached the edge of the asteroid field. They disabled its engines with surgical shots and left it drifting. The third warship turned its guns on the longbow itself, which was a brave move, but a stupid one. The longbow absorbed the hits on its forward armor, rotated calmly, and fired a single concentrated beam that cut the Vorn warship in half. While the fighters dealt with the ships, the Marines hit the asteroid base. They breached at 3 points simultaneously, cutting through the hull in coordinated strikes that happened within seconds of each other. Voroth watched the tactical feed and felt his compound eyes widen. The Marines moved through the corridors of the base like water through cracks, fast, silent, and everywhere at once. They did not shout. They did not threaten. They did not hesitate. They flowed through the base in teams of 4, clearing rooms with a calm mechanical efficiency that was more terrifying than any battle cry. The Syndicate fighters tried to resist. Some of them were hardened mercenaries with years of combat experience. It did not matter. The humans were faster, more coordinated, and absolutely relentless. The hostages were freed in 11 minutes. A Marine medic was treating the wounded before the last Syndicate fighter hit the floor. The 22 surviving crew members of the Shepherd were carried to safety on the longbow while the Marines finished clearing the base. Every Syndicate member in the asteroid was either dead or in restraints within 19 minutes of the first breach. But the humans did not stop. Over the next 72 hours, Vorath watched in stunned silence as the human military executed a campaign that erased the Vorn Syndicate from existence. It was not a war, it was an erasure. Supply caches that the Syndicate had hidden across 4 systems, found and destroyed. Hidden shipyards where they built their raider craft, located and burned. Communication relays shut down. Recruitment outposts on 12 stations raided, the operatives arrested. Financial accounts frozen and seized. Every piece of the Syndicate, from its warships to its bank accounts, was systematically identified and dismantled. An organization that had operated with impunity for over a decade, that had made governments and militaries across the galaxy look helpless, ceased to exist in 3 days. Dukon was captured alive during the assault on his asteroid base. He was brought to Concord Station in chains for trial. Vorath attended the proceedings. The warlord who had once mocked humanity on an open broadcast looked like a different creature. He was thin, his eyes were hollow. When the tribunal asked if he had anything to say, he stared at the floor for a long time. "I did not understand," he whispered. "None of us understood. They were so quiet, so friendly. I thought they were soft." He looked up, and his eyes were the eyes of a creature that had seen something that broke his understanding of the world. They are not soft. They were just not angry yet. The galaxy reacted to the Vorn incident with a mixture of shock and uncomfortable realization. It was not the violence that surprised people. Many species could be violent. It was the totality, the completeness, the absolute refusal to leave any piece of the threat standing. The humans had not won a battle. They had erased an enemy, root and branch, stem and seed, and they had done it in less than a week. And then, 3 days after the Syndicate ceased to exist, a new human medical frigate was spotted in the outer systems. It was heading to the same Yulin refugee camp that the Shepherd had been traveling to. It carried the same medical supplies. It had a new crew of volunteers. Business as usual. Vorath sat alone in his office that night and thought about what he had witnessed. And one detail kept turning over and over in his mind. Cold and sharp. The longbow had arrived in 8 hours. It had been positioned nearby, in a region where it had no official reason to be. The intelligence on the Syndicate's assets, the supply caches, the shipyards, the accounts, had been too detailed, too complete to have been gathered in 72 hours. That kind of intelligence took years to compile. The humans had known about the Vorn Syndicate all along. They had mapped every piece of it. They had positioned a carrier within strike range. They had prepared everything. They had simply been waiting for a reason. And Dukhan, in his arrogance, had given them one. Vorath turned off his screen and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the hum of Concord Station around him. And he understood, finally, the thing that made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. It was not their strength. It was not their technology. It was not even their willingness to fight. It was their patience. They would watch. They would wait. They would smile and trade and share coffee and build theaters and argue about the color of chairs. And the whole time, underneath all of it, they were ready. Always ready. And if you made the mistake of hurting someone they cared about, all that patience would end in a single terrible moment. And then there would be nothing left of you but a warning to others. Vorath finally understood why nobody attacked the humans. It was not because they were feared. It was because the galaxy had learned, one lesson at a time, that some things are better left alone. The great chamber of the Interstellar Council was the largest room on Concord Station. It was built in a wide circle, with tiered seating rising up from a central platform like the inside of a bowl. Normally, half the seats were empty. Delegates skipped sessions. Representatives sent junior staff. The council was important in theory, but boring in practice, and most species treated it like a chore. Today, every single seat was filled. Word had spread across the station that the Koreshi analyst was presenting his findings on humanity. After the Vorn Syndicate incident, there was not a diplomat, military officer, or intelligence operative on Concord Station who did not want to hear what Vorath had to say. Vorath stood on the central platform and looked up at the faces around him. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of species, Koreshi with their compound eyes and thin arms, Dravani in their polished scale armor, Yulin in their water-filled encounter suits, the Sari hovering in silent clusters, Nalori, Torin, Kesh, and a dozen others, all watching, all waiting. Behind Vorath, Korath stood with his arms at his sides, his face a mask of Dravani discipline. Selby sat on a small bench, to the left, her hands folded in her lap, her large dark eyes calm. Vorath activated the central display and began. He started with the data, the 300-year conflict record, the statistical anomaly, the fact that every spacefaring species had been attacked at least once, except humanity. He showed the numbers clearly, simply, without emotion. The delegates shifted in their seats. Some of them had never noticed this pattern. Others had noticed, but had not wanted to think about it. He moved to the testimonies. He played recorded excerpts from their interviews. Graxus the Pirate Lord, explaining why he canceled a raid on a human colony. The Thessari envoy, describing the chaos of a human mind. Admiral Zethru, explaining why he shelved an invasion plan after reading a single briefing on human history. Vorath did not add commentary. He let the words speak for themselves. Then he showed them Haven. Images from their visit. The town of Millbrook, with its crooked streets and laughing children. The community center, with the basketball court and the library. And then the underground command post beneath it. The weapons lockers, the emergency supplies, the communication arrays. The chamber was very quiet. Finally, Vorath showed them the Vorn Syndicate incident, the timeline, the hostage situation, the human response. the 19-minute battle, the 72-hour dismantling of an entire criminal empire, and then the image of a new medical frigate heading to the same refugee camp 3 days later, as if nothing had happened. Vorath turned off the display. He stood in the center of the chamber and spoke directly to the council. For the past 2 months, my colleagues and I have been trying to answer a simple question. Why are humans never attacked? We have spoken to pirates, telepaths, admirals, and civilians. We have visited a human colony world. We have watched a real-time military operation, and we have arrived at an answer. He paused. The chamber was silent. Humans are not untargeted because they are strong. Many species here are strong. The Dravani have the largest fleet in the galaxy. The Koreshi have superior numbers. The Thesari have mental abilities no other species can match. Strength alone does not make a species untouchable. He took a slow breath. Humans are not untargeted because they are feared. Fear fades. Fear can be overcome with enough motivation or enough desperation. If fear were the only barrier, someone would have tested the humans by now. Humans are not untargeted because of treaties or alliances or diplomatic skill, though they have all of these things. Humans are untargeted because every species that has ever studied them closely, every pirate who scouted their colonies, every telepath who touched their minds, every admiral who ran the numbers has come to the same conclusion. He let the silence hang for a moment. The cost of attacking humanity is not measured in ships or territory or credits. It is measured in a simple certainty. If you attack them, they will not stop until you are finished. Not weakened, not pushed back, not taught a lesson. Finished. They will take apart everything you have, piece by piece, and they will not stop until there is nothing left. And they will do it, not because of strategy or politics or military doctrine. They will do it because you hurt someone they care about. Vorath stepped forward. This is the key to understanding humans. They are a social species. They form bonds, deep, emotional, irrational bonds of loyalty, friendship, and love. These bonds do not follow logic. They do not respond to cost calculations. A human will risk death to save a stranger. A human will cross the galaxy to rescue a friend. A human will dismantle an empire to bring one person home. He looked at the delegates. Most species wage war for resources, territory, or power. Humans wage war for each other. And a species that fights for its people rather than its interests cannot be deterred by conventional means. Because there is no price at which they will stop caring. There is no threat large enough to make them abandon someone they love. You cannot buy them off. You cannot scare them away. You can only make them angry. And you do not want to make them angry. Vorath stepped back. The chamber was completely still. Korath stood and walked to the platform. The big Dravani looked out at the council with his yellow eyes and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. I have been a soldier for 30 years. I have fought in 7 campaigns against 5 different species. I have faced enemies with better weapons, bigger armies, and stronger positions. None of them frightened me. He paused. Humans frightened me. A murmur ran through the chamber. A Dravani warrior admitting fear was almost unheard of. Korath raised a hand for silence. Not because they are the strongest, not because they have the best ships, but because they fight for something that cannot be measured or calculated. I have seen warriors who fight for honor, for glory, for survival. Humans fight for each other. Every battle is personal to them. Every life matters to them. And that means they bring everything to every fight. Not because the fight is important, but because the person they are fighting for is important. He looked directly at the Dravani delegation. In my career, the most dangerous enemies I have faced were never the ones with the most weapons. They were the ones who had something they could not bear to lose. For humans, that something is each other. And you cannot beat a species that fights like every battle is the last one that matters. Korath returned to his position. Selby stood and walked to the platform. She was small among the rows of larger species, but her soft voice carried clearly in the silence. On Haven, I asked a human named Danny Callahan what his people would do if they ever faced a threat so great they could not win. He smiled at me and said, "We would find a way. And if we could not find a way, we would make one. And if we could not make one, we would go down swinging so hard that whoever beat us would spend the rest of their existence looking over their shoulder." She let the words settle. I have studied humans for 5 years. I have read their history, their literature, their music, their art. And the one thread that runs through all of it, through everything they have ever created or destroyed or built or burned, is this: they hold on. To each other, to hope, to the belief that the people beside them matter more than anything else in the universe. It is not rational. It is not efficient. It is messy and emotional, and sometimes it tears them apart. But it is also the reason they are still here. And it is the reason no one in this galaxy has ever successfully made them kneel. The chamber was so quiet that Vorath could hear the ventilation system humming. Vorath stepped forward one last time. "Our report will be entered into the interstellar record today," he said. "It is titled Advisory Regarding Humanity, a Species Assessment. I will read the final line for the Council." He looked down at his notes, then looked up and spoke from memory. "Humanity does not seek conflict. They do not glory in war. They would prefer, by every measure, to live in peace. But they carry within them a conviction that those they love must be protected at any cost. This conviction is not a policy. It is not a strategy. It is the core of their identity. And it means that any species foolish enough to threaten what humans hold dear will face not an army, but an entire civilization united by the most powerful force in the known universe: the refusal to let go of the people they love. Do not test this. You will not survive the lesson." The chamber erupted. Delegates spoke over each other in a dozen languages. Some sat in stunned silence. Some looked at the human delegation across the chamber, a small group of men and women in simple clothing, who had been sitting quietly throughout the entire presentation. The humans looked back with calm, friendly faces. A few of them smiled. That evening, Vorath stood alone at a viewport on the upper observation deck of Concord Station. The stars stretched out in front of him, cold and endless. He watched a small human cargo ship drift past the station, a battered, patched vessel with scorch marks on its hull and a name painted on the side that he could not read from this distance. He thought about the people inside that ship, ordinary humans, hauling freight between the stars, probably drinking bad coffee and arguing about something pointless. Probably calling their families on long-range communicators and telling their children good night across light years of empty space. He thought about Danny Callahan and his grandfather's bat by the front door. He thought about Maggie Owens holding her baby while discussing engine specifications. He thought about the teenagers wrestling in the field and the old men arguing on the bench. He thought about 22 hostages carried to safety in 11 minutes, and a criminal empire that stopped existing because it hurt one young nurse named Cody Grant. He thought about a species that built theaters and kept weapons under their schools, that sent doctors to refugee camps and destroyers to anyone who touched them, that smiled at strangers and erased threats with equal ease. The cargo ship drifted on, disappearing slowly into the dark between the stars. Vorath stood at the viewport for a long time. And for the first time in his 40-year career, a career spent studying threats, calculating risks, and measuring the danger of every species in the galaxy, the old Koreshi analyst felt something entirely new. Gratitude. Deep, genuine gratitude that humanity considered the Koreshi friends. And beneath that gratitude, quiet and steady as a heartbeat, a profound relief that he would never ever have to find out what happened when they did not. He turned away from the viewport and walked back to his quarters. Behind him, the stars burned on in silence, and somewhere among them, ordinary humans were doing ordinary things, laughing, arguing, loving, building, and carrying within them a fire that the entire galaxy had learned, one hard lesson at a time, was better left undisturbed. Vorath had spent 40 years reading numbers. He was a senior analyst of the Koreshi Dominion, and numbers were his whole life. He sat in his small office aboard Concord Station, a massive diplomatic hub that floated in orbit around a neutral star, and he looked at data the way a doctor looks at a patient. He searched for things that did not belong. He searched for patterns that broke. And on this particular evening, under the cold blue light of his desk screen, he found something that made him stop breathing. It was a simple chart. Nothing fancy. Just a record of every major conflict in the known galaxy over the past 300 years. Every war, every raid, every border fight, every act of piracy, all of it logged and sorted by species. Vorath had been updating this chart as part of a routine project for the Koreshi Intelligence Bureau. It was boring work. He had done it 100 times before. But tonight, for the first time, he sorted the data in a new way. He asked one simple question: which species had been targeted, and how many times? The answer was exactly what he expected, for every species except one. The Koreshi had suffered 9 major wars. The Dravani, those big reptilian warriors who loved to talk about honor, had been involved in 14 border conflicts. The Yulin, a peaceful water-dwelling species with no real military, had been conquered twice. The Thesari had fought off 6 invasions. The Nilori had lost 2 colony worlds to raiders. Every single spacefaring species in the galactic record had been attacked at least once. Except humans. Vorath stared at the screen. He checked the data again. He ran it through 3 different filters. He cross-referenced it with piracy reports, military incident logs, and diplomatic complaint records. The result was always the same. In 80 years of being part of the galactic community, humans had never been attacked. Not once. No raids on their colonies. No piracy against their cargo ships. No border conflicts. No hostile actions of any kind from anyone. 0. Vorath leaned back in his chair, his forearms folded across his thin chest. His compound eyes blinked rapidly, which was the Koreshi version of deep confusion. This made no sense. Humans were not the strongest species. Their fleet was decent but nothing special, maybe 200 warships, which was small compared to the Dravani armada of 800, or the Koreshi swarm carriers that numbered over 1,000. Human technology was good, but not the best. Their worlds were spread across a modest stretch of space, and several of their outer colonies had thin defenses. By every logical measure, humans should have been raided dozens of times by now. They were, on paper, the perfect target, rich enough to be worth hitting, spread out enough to be hard to defend, and new enough to the galactic stage that they should not have many allies yet. But nobody had touched them. Nobody. Vorath saved the data and went looking for answers. He found Korath in the station's combat training hall, which was the only place you ever found Korath. The Dravani was 7 feet of scaled muscle and bad attitude. He served as a military attaché for the Dravani Empire, and he spent most of his free time hitting things. Vorath had worked with him on 3 joint intelligence projects, and despite their differences, they had developed something close to friendship, or at least a mutual respect built on shared annoyance at everyone else. "I need you to look at something," Vorath said. Korath did not stop punching the training dummy. "Is it important?" "Humans have never been attacked." He turned and looked at Vorath with his yellow slit eyes. "What do you mean, never?" "I mean never. Not once. In 80 years. Korath was quiet for a moment. Then he snorted. Lucky. Nobody is that lucky for 80 years. Korath thought about this. Then he picked up a towel and wiped the sweat off his scales. Fine. Show me. They went to Vorath's office, and Vorath showed him the data. Korath looked it over with the careful eye of a career soldier. He tried to find holes in it. He suggested that maybe humans had been attacked, but had not reported it. Vorath showed him that all the data came from independent sources, not human records. He suggested that maybe humans had secret alliances that protected them. Vorath pointed out that no such alliances existed in any treaty database. After an hour, Korath sat back and crossed his thick arms. This is strange, he admitted, which was the Dravani equivalent of saying it was deeply alarming. They brought in Selby the next morning. She was a Yulin researcher, small, blue-skinned, with large, dark eyes, and a soft voice that made everything she said sound like a bedtime story. But Selby was sharp. She had spent the last 5 years studying human culture as part of a Yulin academic exchange program, and she knew more about humans than almost any non-human alive. This does not surprise me, Selby said when she saw the data. Vorath and Korath both looked at her. What do you mean it does not surprise you? Vorath asked. I mean I have studied humans for years, and there is something about them that most species feel but cannot name. A kind of, she paused, searching for the right word, warning, like the bright colors on a poisonous creature. You look at humans, and everything seems normal. They smile, they joke, they share food with strangers. But underneath all of that, there is something else. Something that every predator in the galaxy can sense. Korath grunted. You are being dramatic. Am I? Selby said calmly. Then explain the data. He could not. They agreed to investigate together. Vorath would handle the numbers and the intelligence files. Korath would reach out to military contacts. Selby would provide the cultural context. They would find out why humans were untouchable. It took Vorath 2 days to get access to the classified file. He had to call in 3 favors and make one promise he did not want to think about. But when the Koreshi Intelligence Bureau finally sent it to his encrypted terminal, he knew it had been worth it. The file was a compilation of intercepted communications from 6 different hostile factions across the galaxy. Pirate fleets, warlord clans, rogue states, mercenary coalitions. All of them dangerous, all of them aggressive, all of them experienced at raiding and conquest. And at some point over the past 80 years, every single one of them had considered attacking human targets. Every single one of them had changed their minds. The communications were short, some were just a few lines, but the tone was the same in all of them. A sharp, sudden reversal, like someone who had reached for a piece of fruit and then realized it was sitting on top of a sleeping predator. One pirate captain wrote to his fleet, New orders. We skip the human convoy. Do not ask why. Just do it. A warlord sent a message to his advisors. Remove the human colonies from the target list. All of them, permanently. A mercenary commander told his employer, You can double the payment, triple it. I am not going near human space. Find someone else. There is no one else stupid enough, but that is your problem. The file had no analysis, no explanation, just the raw communications and a simple label on the cover page that read, Advisories regarding the humans, do not engage. Vorath read every word 3 times. Then he closed the file, sat in the dark silence of his office, and felt the first real chill of fear he had experienced in decades. Something was very different about humans. The entire galaxy seemed to know it, and Vorath was going to find out what it was.